Hey guys, welcome back to another Planet Mithril Paints, and today we'll be showing you how to paint Aragorn, aka Strider, as he was in the Fellowship of the Ring. From a humble ranger background, this mighty hero of men was instrumental in the fall of Sauron, time and time again standing as a beacon of hope and strength in the face of unrelenting odds on his path to eventually become king. I'd say he deserves a proper paint job, wouldn't you? So without further delay, please sit back, relax and enjoy the video. Start off by base coating Aragorn's face and hands with Bugman's Glow. Make sure to get all the undersides of the hands. You don't have to worry too much about covering the lower half of his face, as this is predominantly beard anyway. Layer over all the skin with a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone. Once the wash is dried, re-layer over with the previous Bugman's Cadian mix, leaving the Reichland flesh shade showing in the recesses around the face and between the fingers. As Aragorn's face has been half claimed by beard, it's important to try and capture the character with what little facial surface area we have left to work with. Layer over all the skin now with pure Cadian flesh tone. Focus on the individual fingers, nose, upper cheekbones and creases around the forehead to give him a suitably weathered, rangery look. We'll be highlighting the flesh as we do in our normal way by adding pallid witch flesh, but to give him that weathered, been out in the sun a bit too much look, we won't be adding quite as much of it as we usually do. Highlight now with a mix of Cadian flesh tone and pallid witch flesh, and start further defining the grizzled features of his face. Careful application to the cheekbones and forehead in particular can really help define some of this model's more distinctive features and bring a lot of overall character to the model. Finally, add more pallid witch flesh to the mix for the final dot highlight on the pronounced areas of skin, knuckles and fingertips, pushing your previous highlights further. Your mix should contain no more than approximately 35% pallid witch flesh at this point. This will prevent the weather-worn ranger from having too much of a washed out, pristine look to his skin. You can also, at this point, carefully pick out the eyes using Abaddon Black and pallid witch flesh. Aragorn's hair and beard is characteristically very dark. We're going to be using darker hues to reflect this as accurately as possible, with highlights that don't bring up the tone too much and make it look cleaner or neater than it actually should be. Base coat all the hair, beard and moustache with a mix of Rhinox hide and Abaddon Black. The Abaddon tones down the Rhinox enough to let the subtle hues of the brown come through and create a really nice overall colour for us to highlight off further down the line. Add a small amount of Gawthor brown to the mix for the first all over layer. We're going to be adding this gradually to avoid bringing up the hue of the hair too starkly. Once the wash is dry, re-layer over with the previous mix, leaving the Agrax Earthshade showing in the deepest recesses. Carefully start to pick out the larger clumps of hair and individual hairs where necessary. This is particularly the case down by his shoulders where the hair separates out. As well, here you want to carefully start marking out individual beard lines with small vertical lines across the length of his beard line and moustache. Don't worry, these don't have to be too neat as of yet. Add some more Gawthor brown to the mix and start carefully picking out individual hairs over Aragorn's head. This is a painstaking process, but the more careful and precise you can be here, the better the overall effect will be when finished. Try and keep smooth, unbroken lines from the crown on his head, no pun intended Mr. Future King, to give an authentic, natural and almost lank, unwashed look to his hair. Once this is done, apply this across the beard and moustache as we did in the previous stage, but with tighter, more targeted lines to create depth across the facial hair. Now we're going to add a small amount of padded witch flesh to the mix for the final edge highlight over the hair. This washes out the overall mixture enough to give the overall look of the hair a very dirty, grubby, almost wet looking appearance, which reflects the ruggedness and outdoor nature of this character well. Focuses on the outer curls of hair, the tips at the ends and the peaks of the crown, as well as the tips and the edges of all the facial hair. A key feature of the majority of the Aragorn sculpts is the characteristic green jacket he sports throughout the majority of the films, almost as much of a relic as Andoril is in our opinion. Start off by base coating the jacket with a mix of wild flesh and Rhinox hide. We didn't want to pick a particularly bright or vibrant green for the jacket, as again, it's weather worn, beaten and sun bleached from all his rangery escapades, and the Rhinox hide tones the hue down enough to give it a very natural camo green look, perfect for skulking around in the bushes tracking his foes. Apply an all-over layer now by adding a small amount of the messy desert to the mix. This lifts the tone naturally and complements the earthy feel foundation we have from the Rhinox hide. Make sure to get in all the nooks and crannies, under the arms, between the legs and the inner areas of material. Once the wash is dried, relay over the previous mix, leaving the Arathorn camo shade showing in the deepest recesses. Start picking out the separate folds of material. The main body of the jacket has a lot of distinct folds defined throughout, which makes this part particularly easy to deal with. The arms are a different story, however. The defined folds across his outstretched arms aren't as distinct as the rest of the jacket, so take your time here and carefully try to locate the proper areas for this layer to go on in order to create natural flow to the material. Whatever layers you apply here will be the base for the highlights still to come, so it's important to get this stage right. Take your time and don't panic. Continue to add the messy desert to the mix for the first highlight stage. Now you want to further define the areas of cloth you layered in the previous stage by pushing your highlights out towards the edges, leaving a defined progression of paint all the way through to the Arathorn camo shade still showing in the recesses. This gives a natural progression of depth and shadow and smoothens the transition between the darker and lighter areas of material. You can continue to add more of the messy desert here to apply as many interim highlights as you like before we move on to the final highlight stages. We applied 2 additional applications of highlights here, gradually increasing the amount of the messy desert for each layer. Now we've got some really nice smooth defined highlights we want to bring the tone up for the absolute upper and outer folds of material for the final few highlight stages. To accomplish this, we added a small amount of Nurgling green to the overall mix and applied this as a defiant edge highlight across all the defined folds of the jacket. Be careful not to overdo the addition of Nurgling green here, as too much too quickly will bring the tone up too drastically, and then you risk ruining all the hard work you've already put into the jacket. Always remember, you can add more paint, but you can't take it away. Finally, we added more nurgling greens in the mix for the final dot highlight just to the crests and uppermost areas of material, just to make them pop a little bit more as they catch the light whilst Aragorn scours the wilderness. We want to make sure we create some subtle differentiation between Aragorn's jerkin and hair. To do this, we'll be basing and highlighting using a few different browns which will complement but stand apart from areas we've already painted. Start off by base coating the jerkin with a mix of rhinox hide and dryad bark. Layer over by adding Baneblade Brown to the mix. The Baneblade Brown lifts the tone much more subtly than Gorthor or other browns would here, and will give the tunic more of a rugged, aged leather look once finished. Once the wash is dry, relayer over with the previous mix, leaving the Agrak Thirshade showing in the recesses. Similarly with Legolas's tunic in the previous video, there aren't an awful lot of defined folds, particularly down the skirts of the jerkin, so any recesses you can find should be left showing the Agrak Thirshade, and with careful application to the subtle outer fold, you'll create a smooth blended transition between these two areas on the model. Continue to add more Baneblade Brown to the mix for the first highlight stage, and again, as with the jacket, start pushing the paint towards the upper folds and peaks in the material to create natural flow. Finally, add a small amount of padded witch flesh to the mix for the final edge highlight. This will give the upper surface of leather a slightly cracked look and will look like the sun has bleached the integrity and colour right out of the leather itself. Carefully pick out all the belt straps on Aragorn, the bedroll, and quiver on his back, as well as the bow itself with dryad bark. Now carefully apply an edge highlight with Gorthor Brown. With the bow, create a wood grain effect by drawing your brush in long, fine lines down its length. Any overspills of thicker lines that you're not happy with can be touched up with dryad bark again. paint Aragorn's sword, scabbard tip and the ring of Barahir on his finger with Leadbelcher. Once the null oil is dry, apply a fine edge highlight to the blade and hilt with Runefang steel to give it some sharpness. You can also apply a pinpoint dot highlight to the ring just to let it catch the light and be a little bit more prominent on his finger. Paint the quiver, trousers, scabbard and arm patch on the jacket with a mix of Skavenblight Dinge and Abaddon Black. Once the wash is dried, re-layer over the previous mix, leaving the Nuln oil showing in the recesses. Finally, apply an edge highlight with pure Skavenblight Dinge to the edges and outer folds of material. We wanted to paint the boots slightly differently, just so the bottom half of the model doesn't become a dark grey blob when on the tabletop. Base coat the boots with a mix of Mechanicus Standard Grey and Abaddon Black. The lighter grey here just subtly separates the boots from the trousers directly above. Apply an edge highlight now with pure Mechanicus Standard Grey. The rims of the boots are all really well defined, so use these as guidelines as to where this highlight should be applied, as well as framing the feet and ankles where the material bunches up. Carefully now pick up the boot straps with dry bark. Apply a highlight now with pure Gorthor Brown, just to tie them in with the other straps across the model. Finally, pick up the bedroll on his back with Caliban Green. We chose this here as it stands out against the other green hues of the overcoat. Layer over with a mix of Caliban Green and some Etty Desert. Finally, add more Etty Desert to the mix for the final edge highlight across the bedroll. There you have it, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, ready to take the tables by storm, protecting his friends, slaying many an orc and carving out his path on the road to becoming the leader of the free peoples of Middle-earth.